In shock, all witnessed humans storm out of the assembly. The Grand Hall was a massive structure, filled with representatives from all corners of the galaxy. Species of all shapes and sizes stood together, looking around in a mix of curiosity and unease. The air was thick with the hum of different languages, all blending into one continuous murmur. At the front of the room stood the speaker of the assembly, a towering alien figure from the Reiki species, known for their imposing stature and cold demeanor. Around the speaker were other high-ranking officials, representing various factions of the galaxy. Lucas Tanner, the human ambassador, stood with his team near the back of the hall, his hands clasped behind his back. He was flanked by Maria McKenna and Ethan Hayes. Maria, a sharp-eyed strategist, scanned the room with a calculating look, while Ethan stood tall with his arms crossed, clearly irritated by the growing tension. Lucas had always found these gatherings to be a mix of awe and discomfort. The Galactic Assembly was an event where the most important beings in the universe came together, but it also reminded him of how small and insignificant humanity often felt among the stars. The humans, despite their accomplishments, were still seen as new and unimportant in the eyes of most alien races. The speaker raised one of his massive hands, and the room quieted instantly. The buzzing stopped. Every eye in the hall turned toward him, waiting for his words. The speaker's voice was deep, rich, and full of authority. It echoed through the hall as he began to speak. "Today, we gather to make a decision that will shape the future of this galaxy," the speaker declared. "We stand on the brink of a new era where peace will finally reign across the stars. But peace comes with sacrifices, and those sacrifices must be made to preserve the balance we have worked so hard to create." Lucas exchanged a glance with Maria. They had been briefed on the purpose of this assembly: to vote on a new galactic decree that would determine the role of each species in the greater intergalactic alliance. But the details had been kept secret, and now, as the speaker spoke, a cold feeling began to creep into Lucas's chest. "The human race has shown great potential," the speaker continued, "but it has become clear that their place in the galactic order is not as significant as they might believe. They are to be restricted from certain key positions in the council. Their participation in this assembly will be reduced, and their influence will be limited to smaller matters." The words hit like a slap across the face. Lucas felt his heart race, his hands clenching at his sides. He could see Maria's face tighten and Ethan's expression darken in anger. This wasn't just a minor adjustment. It was an outright demotion of humanity's status in the galaxy, a decision that would hurt the efforts they had worked so hard for. Maria's eyes met Lucas's. Without a word, she gave a slight shake of her head. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They had been promised a fair opportunity to represent humanity, to show the galaxy that humans had a rightful place among the stars. And now here they were, being cast aside as if they didn't matter. Ethan's voice broke through the silence, barely contained. "What does that mean for us?" he asked, his voice low but filled with frustration. "We've worked for years to get here, to make something of ourselves in this assembly, and now, just like that, they pull the rug out from under us." Lucas didn't respond at first. He knew Ethan's anger was justified, but this wasn't the time to act rashly. They had to keep calm, keep their focus. His eyes swept the room, taking in the faces of the alien representatives. Some were watching him with amusement, others with indifference. It was clear to him now that this decision was more than just political, it was personal. The aliens were still wary of humans. They didn't trust them. But what bothered Lucas most was that no one had seen this coming. There had been no warning, no indication that humanity's influence would be diminished. This was a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter how hard humans fought, no matter how much they accomplished, they were still seen as nothing more than an afterthought. The speaker's voice once again echoed through the hall. "We have decided that humans will no longer hold any significant role in this council. Their presence here will be minimal, and they will only be consulted on matters that directly concern their own species. This decision has been made in the interest of galactic peace." Lucas's mind raced. He glanced at Maria and Ethan, both of whom were visibly upset. Maria's face had gone pale, and Ethan's fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Lucas could feel his own heart beating loudly in his chest. His mind was clouded with a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. How could this have happened? The speaker's words seemed to grow distant, almost inaudible, as Lucas's thoughts spiraled. He thought of Earth, of the progress humanity had made in the last century, how they had managed to achieve things no one thought possible. But none of that seemed to matter now. All of it was being erased in a single moment. "I won't stand for this," Ethan finally muttered under his breath, his voice trembling with fury. "We've earned our place here. We won't just let them shove us aside." Lucas placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, urging him to calm down. But he knew it wasn't just Ethan who was feeling this way. He could feel the frustration of every human in the room. There were whispers now, as other human delegates began to murmur among themselves, clearly shocked by the announcement. Maria leaned in, her voice low but steady. "Lucas, what are we going to do?" The question hung in the air, but Lucas didn't have an immediate answer. He had to think. They couldn't just leave. They couldn't let this happen. But if they didn't take a stand now, it would only get worse. "I'll handle it," Lucas said quietly, his voice firm. He wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but he knew he had to do something. He had to act. He couldn't just sit by and let humanity be pushed to the sidelines, not after everything they had accomplished. And then, just as Lucas was about to speak, something unexpected happened. A voice, clear and commanding, rose from the back of the room. It was a human voice, one that had been quiet until now. It was another delegate, a woman named Sarah Davies. She was younger than Lucas, but her words were sharp and full of conviction. "They've made a mistake," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the room. "We're not going to sit back and let this happen. We're human and we deserve better than this." Lucas turned toward her, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected Sarah to speak up, but in that moment, he knew they couldn't let the speaker's decision go unchallenged. They had to show the assembly that humans weren't going to be silenced. Not now, not ever. The tension in the room grew thicker as the other human delegates began to stand with Sarah. Maria, Ethan, and Lucas exchanged looks. They had a choice to make now. They could accept the decision, keep their heads down, and continue to work within the limited boundaries that the assembly had set for them. Or they could take a stand. And in that moment, Lucas knew what he had to do. He had to lead his people. It was time to take action. "Humanity will not be sidelined," Lucas said, stepping forward. His voice was calm but filled with authority. "We will not stand for this decision. We will fight for our place just as we always have. We are not leaving. We will make them see the value of humanity, or we will show them that we can survive without their approval." As his words echoed in the hall, Lucas saw the other human delegates nod in agreement. There was a fire in their eyes now. It wasn't just anger, it was determination. And that, more than anything, would be what they needed to win this battle. The speaker's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the entire room fell silent again. It was as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But Lucas stood firm, his gaze unwavering. The future of humanity was at stake, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from them. The stage was set. Now all they had to do was make their move, and Lucas knew without a doubt that humanity would not back down. The room was filled with whispers. Humans stood together in a small corner, their expressions a mixture of confusion, anger, and determination. The alien representatives, who had been so confident moments earlier, now looked uneasy. The Reiki's speaker stood tall at the front of the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the shift in the atmosphere. Lucas Tanner, Maria McKenna, and Ethan Hayes stood in the center of the human delegation. Maria's eyes were sharp, calculating. Ethan's fists were still clenched, his frustration barely contained. But Lucas was calm, determined. This was a turning point. The speaker raised a hand, signaling for quiet. The room slowly fell silent, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "It seems we have a disagreement," the speaker's deep voice rumbled, echoing through the hall. "Humanity's presence here has always been a point of discussion. You are not equal to the others as you believe yourselves to be." Lucas stood tall, his voice firm and steady. "We do not seek equality, we seek respect," he said. The words felt heavy in the air. "For years, humanity has proven its worth, fighting side by side with every race in this room. We have contributed more than you realize." The speaker's lip curled in a thin smile, one that didn't quite reach his cold eyes. "Your contributions are noted, but the decision stands. Humanity's role in this assembly is now diminished. You will not have a say in matters that affect the greater galaxy." A ripple of shock spread through the human delegates. Lucas could feel the weight of the moment, the uncertainty hanging in the balance. The anger that had burned so brightly moments ago began to settle into something else, something far more dangerous. They were being underestimated, and this was a mistake they would not soon forget. Maria spoke next, her voice calm but full of fire. "You think that this is just about our position in your assembly? It's not. It's about the future. You are making a dangerous choice. The galaxy will change, and you will see that humanity is not something to be ignored." The speaker's eyes narrowed, but his response was quick. "I think it is you who fail to understand, Maria McKenna. Your kind has barely managed to maintain peace within your own borders. You are not ready to sit at the table with the great races of this galaxy." Maria's hand clenched at her side, but she did not back down. Ethan, standing beside her, took a step forward. "We've worked for this," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We've fought wars, we've faced challenges, and we've grown stronger. You think this decision will break us, but it won't. We will not let this go." Lucas watched his two companions, and for a moment he felt a sense of pride. They were right. They had earned their place. Humanity had fought for years to be respected, and now that respect was being ripped away in an instant. The anger was still there, but it was now mixing with something else: determination. Humanity would not be silenced. The speaker glanced at the other alien delegates, as if seeking approval. Some nodded in agreement, while others simply watched in silence. The atmosphere was growing more tense by the second. It was clear that the decision had been made, and now there was no going back. Lucas took a deep breath. "I will not accept this decision," he said, his voice ringing through the room. "We will not be reduced to nothing. You cannot simply ignore the contributions of an entire species. Humanity will continue to have a voice, whether you allow it or not." The speaker's expression darkened. "You will regret this, human. This is not a negotiation. This is the future of the galaxy." "We are part of that future," Lucas replied, "and we will prove it." For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then the Reiki speaker's voice cut through the stillness. "Very well," he said, his tone colder than before. "If you insist on challenging the decision, then you will leave this assembly. The humans are no longer welcome here. Go back to your home and reflect on the choice you've made." The words hit like a blow. The human delegation stood frozen, their minds reeling. This was it. There was no turning back now. They had been dismissed, cast aside by the very beings they had worked alongside for so long. Maria's eyes flashed with anger, but Lucas knew this wasn't the time for rage. They had to leave, yes, but they also had to make a statement. The decision to walk out of the assembly wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a declaration of strength. They weren't giving up. They were leaving, but they weren't done. Without a word, Lucas turned toward the exit. He didn't look back, but he could feel the eyes of the entire assembly on him. Behind him, the human delegation began to follow, moving in a tight group. The alien representatives stood still, some watching in silence, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The speaker's voice echoed behind them, but they didn't stop. "Leave now," the speaker called after them, "and do not return." But the humans were already out the door. The cold, sterile hallway stretched before them. It felt both familiar and foreign, as if they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The door behind them slammed shut with a heavy finality, and Lucas knew that this moment would be remembered. It would be marked in history as the day humanity stood up for itself. Outside the hall, the stars twinkled in the distance, silent witnesses to the decision they had made. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was still a small part of it, but they had shown that they were not to be dismissed so easily. Ethan broke the silence first. "They think we'll just crawl back and beg for a seat at their table, but we won't. We'll make them see the value of humanity. We will make them regret this." Maria nodded, her expression grim. "They've made a mistake, but it's not just about our pride. It's about our place in the galaxy, and we'll fight for that." Lucas turned to them, his face calm but resolute. "This is only the beginning. They've underestimated us, and now we'll show them exactly what humanity is capable of." The decision to walk out of the assembly was just the first step. There was still so much to do. The fight was far from over, and Lucas knew that their path would not be easy. But there was one thing he was certain of: humanity would not be silenced. They would rise stronger than ever. They were not leaving the galaxy behind. They were claiming their place in it. And this time, no one would stand in their way. The air outside the Grand Assembly Hall felt different. The coldness of the space around them seemed to mirror the chill that had settled in their hearts. The human delegation stood in a tight circle, still processing the weight of what had just happened. Lucas Tanner, Maria McKenna, and Ethan Hayes were at the center of the group, but each of them was lost in their own thoughts. They had just walked out of the most important gathering in the galaxy, and they knew that this moment would define everything from here on out. "Did they really just do that?" Ethan said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "After everything we've done, everything we've fought for, they just threw us out like we're nothing." Lucas didn't answer immediately. He had always been a calm leader, but even he could feel the fire inside him growing. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to make the speaker and the assembly feel the weight of their decision. But now was not the time. There would be a time for that, a time to make them regret their choices, but that time wasn't right now. Maria stepped forward, her eyes scanning the horizon of the alien world they had landed on. The stars seemed to stretch endlessly above them, a reminder of how vast and unforgiving the galaxy could be. "They think they can control us," she said, her voice low but firm. "They think that by pushing us aside they'll break us, but they're wrong." "This is just the beginning," Lucas nodded. Maria always had a way of focusing on what mattered. She was right. This wasn't the end, it was just the start of something new. "We won't let them make us weak," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We'll prove that humanity deserves more than they've given us. We'll show them that we won't back down." The group was silent for a moment, each person reflecting on the enormity of the situation. The decision they had made to storm out of the assembly wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of strength. But now they had to figure out what came next. They couldn't just walk away and hope things would get better. They had to take action, and they had to do it quickly. "We need to get back to Earth," Ethan said after a moment, his voice still tight with anger. "We need to rally our people, show them that we're not just going to sit back and let the galaxy walk all over us." Lucas agreed. "We need to organize. Humanity's not just going to sit in the background anymore. We'll fight for our place, and we'll make sure they know that we are a force to be reckoned with." Maria glanced at Lucas. "And what about the other races in the galaxy? They're not all going to turn on us." "Some of them are still on our side." Lucas thought for a moment. "We'll reach out to them, but we need to be careful. There's a lot of politics involved here, and not every race is going to side with us just because we've been wronged. We have to make sure we have support before we act." The human delegation nodded in agreement. They knew what they had to do. They couldn't just rely on the assembly for their place in the galaxy. They had to forge their own path, one that would prove humanity's worth to every race, every species, every world. As they turned to leave the alien world, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of determination. This wasn't the future he had imagined when he first set out to represent humanity, but it was the future they had now, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from them. The journey back to Earth was long and quiet. The ship they were on was small, but it gave them the privacy they needed to discuss their next steps. Maria was already working on a plan, organizing messages to be sent to Earth's leaders and allies. Ethan was on the communication system, trying to get in touch with representatives from other planets who might be sympathetic to their cause. Lucas stood by the viewport, looking out into the stars. It was strange to think that just hours ago, they had been inside that grand hall, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Now they were on their own, cast out by the very people they had worked with for so long. But that didn't scare him. In fact, it gave him a sense of freedom. The galaxy was vast, and there were endless possibilities for humanity. They had just been told they didn't belong in the assembly, but Lucas knew better. Humanity wasn't just some insignificant race. They had fought wars, explored new worlds, and built something that was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They weren't going to be silenced by a single decision made by those who didn't understand them. The next few days were filled with activity. Messages were sent, allies were contacted, and plans were drawn up. But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. The speaker's words still echoed in his mind. "Your place in the galaxy is not as significant as you believe." That statement had been a warning that humanity was still seen as inferior. But Lucas wasn't about to accept that. He wasn't going to let anyone tell him that humanity didn't have a place in the galaxy. He believed in the potential of humanity, in the strength of every individual. And if the galaxy couldn't see that, then humanity would make them see it. But there was still a long road ahead. The galaxy was not going to change overnight, and neither were the minds of the alien races. Some would remain hostile, others would remain indifferent. But Lucas knew that there were others out there who would stand with them, who would see humanity for what it was, a force of strength, resilience, and determination. As the ship approached Earth, the team gathered together in the main cabin. Maria looked up from her datapad and met Lucas's eyes. "It's time to take action," she said. "We need to show the galaxy that we won't be pushed around anymore." Ethan nodded. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've got this. We'll make them regret ever underestimating us." Lucas smiled, a small but confident smile. "We've got something they don't. We've got the will to fight, and that's more than enough." The ship landed on Earth and the team disembarked, stepping onto the familiar soil. The world was still the same, but everything had changed. Humanity was no longer just a part of the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they were going to make sure that everyone knew it. The human delegation wasted no time. They contacted Earth's leaders, telling them everything that had happened in the assembly. There was shock, disbelief, and then a fierce determination to take action. Earth wasn't going to back down, and neither would the people who had been dismissed. The entire planet stood together, ready to face the challenges ahead. The word spread quickly. News outlets reported the story, and debates began to heat up. Some people believed that humanity should have accepted the Assembly's decision and kept a low profile. But most stood with the human delegation. They understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about politics. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy, about fighting for their rights to be heard. And as the days passed, Lucas knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and there would be challenges. But humanity had never been afraid of a fight. They had earned their place, and now they would make the galaxy see it. The storming out of the assembly wasn't just a dramatic gesture. It was a statement. And that statement was clear. Humanity would not be ignored. They would not be silenced. They would rise, and they would make their mark on the galaxy. And the galaxy would never forget the day humanity declared their place in the stars. The days following their exit from the assembly were filled with tension and uncertainty. Lucas Tanner, Maria McKenna, and Ethan Hayes, along with the rest of the human delegation, had returned to Earth. But their minds were still in the distant halls of the assembly, still reeling from the decision that had just been made. The human race had been dismissed, humiliated, and sidelined by the very beings they had worked so hard to be recognized by. But now, they had a chance to make things right. The human race had always been good at bouncing back, at finding ways to turn setbacks into triumphs. And this was no different. Earth's leaders had been shocked by the announcement, but they quickly rallied behind the cause. It didn't take long for the decision to go public, and the response was overwhelming. News outlets across the planet broadcast the story of the Assembly's decision, and the reactions were varied. Some saw it as a betrayal, while others felt that humanity should have expected it. But what mattered most was the surge of support from humanity's own people. The message was clear. They were not going to sit idly by and let the galaxy decide their fate. Maria, Lucas, and Ethan knew that they had a long road ahead of them. It wasn't enough to simply rally support on Earth. The real work was going to be in convincing the rest of the galaxy that humanity had a rightful place at the table. And that meant reaching out to their allies, to the races and species who had worked with humanity before, those who understood what humanity was capable of. "We need to move quickly," Maria said one evening as the team gathered in their headquarters. "The longer we wait, the more time the Assembly has to solidify their position. We need to make it clear that we won't back down." Lucas agreed. "We can't afford to waste time. We need to make our presence felt, and we need to do it in a way that shows the galaxy just how strong humanity is." Ethan nodded. "I've been in contact with a few of our allies. Some of the smaller races are already on our side, but we need more. We need the bigger players, the ones who can make a real difference in the Assembly." It was true. While humanity had earned the respect of many races over the years, not all of them were ready to stand with them just yet. There were many who still viewed humans as unproven, still seen as the new kids in the galaxy. But Lucas wasn't discouraged. They had made it this far, and they would continue to push forward, no matter the obstacles. Over the next few weeks, the human delegation worked tirelessly. They met with diplomats, strategists, and military leaders, all of whom knew that the stakes were higher than ever. Every move had to be calculated. Every word had to be carefully chosen. Lucas knew that the fate of humanity rested on their ability to build alliances. to convince others that they had a vital role to play in the galaxy's future. One of the first races they contacted was the Elari, a peaceful species known for their advanced technology and their neutral stance in galactic politics. The Elari had been allies of humanity during the early years of space exploration, and Lucas knew they were one of their best hopes for support. But even the Elari weren't willing to take sides without careful consideration. "We understand your frustration," said Ambassador Kira, the Elari representative. "But the Assembly's decision was not made in haste. It was a decision made for the balance of the galaxy. If we side with you, we risk angering the larger factions that have a much stronger hold on the Council." Lucas listened carefully, but he could feel the tension building in his chest. "I understand that," he said, "but the Assembly has made a mistake. Humanity has earned its place, and if we let this go unchallenged, we're telling the galaxy that they can do this to anyone. It's not just about us. It's about standing up for what's right." Kira was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "You are asking us to risk much, Lucas. But I can see your resolve. I will take your plea back to my people, but I cannot promise anything." It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. They had made the case, and the Elari had agreed to consider it. But the road to convincing other races was going to be long and difficult, and the larger factions in the Assembly would not give up their power without a fight. While Lucas and Maria worked on diplomacy, Ethan was focused on something else. He was tracking the reactions of the galactic military, trying to gauge where they stood. As much as diplomacy was necessary, there were times when force spoke louder than words. If humanity was going to have a chance, they needed to be prepared to defend themselves. "The military is watching us," Ethan said one evening as he scrolled through his datapad. "And they're nervous. The larger factions are trying to figure out what we'll do next. They know we're not going to roll over, but they're not sure if we're ready to fight." "We can't fight the entire galaxy," Maria said, but there was a hint of pride in her voice. "But we don't have to. We just need to show them that we're not afraid to stand our ground." Lucas looked between them. "Exactly. We don't need to be the strongest power in the galaxy. We just need to prove that we're not weak. We have allies, we have the will, and we have the strength of our people. That's all we need." The tension between the human delegation and the Assembly continued to grow. While diplomatic efforts were underway, there was still a sense of urgency in the air. Humanity had been given an ultimatum, and they had no choice but to rise to the challenge. But they were no longer working from the shadows. They were standing in the light, ready to show the galaxy who they were and what they were capable of. Back on Earth, the people were ready to fight for their future. Protests broke out in the major cities, and rallies were held to show solidarity with the human delegation. The message was clear: humanity would not be silenced, they would not be pushed aside, they would stand tall no matter the cost. "The people are with us," Maria said, her eyes scanning the reports. "They understand what's at stake." "It's not just about pride," Lucas added. "It's about our future, about showing the galaxy that we have the strength to protect it." But even as the support grew, Lucas knew that the path forward would not be easy. There would be battles ahead, not just in the Assembly, but across the galaxy. The larger factions wouldn't let humanity's defiance go unanswered. And while the human race was united in their resolve, they would need every ally, every bit of strength, and every ounce of courage to make their mark. In the days that followed, the human delegation continued their work, contacting more races, forming alliances, and preparing for whatever the galaxy would throw at them. They knew that the road ahead would be tough, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and they had the support of the people who believed in them. The Assembly had thought they could push humanity to the side, but they had underestimated the will of a species that had always fought for its place. Humanity was not just a small part of the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity was here to stay. And as Lucas looked out at the stars once more, he knew that the fight had only just begun. But they were ready. And they would not back down. The galaxy was vast, but humanity was determined to find its place among the stars. And no one, no matter how powerful, could take that away from them.